some of the terms for a minute here. There's a genre of learning, which is to make it broad. Everything that's legal is called halacha. Everything not legal is called agadah. People are familiar with the term agadah from Theodore Herzl. But there, and this is what's interesting, in that vernacular, he says, Im tirtzu ze lo agadah. It's no fairy tale if you want. Shalom. That is Theodore Herzl. In other words, agadah in the modern, you can come sit up front. Oibenon. Oibenon means the guys who sit by the eastern wall. That's what Tevye would say. If I'm sitting by the eastern wall, everyone thinks I'll have the money. They'll think I'm smart. Oibenun, all the way up front. Anyway, so im tirtzu ze lo agadah, or some form of that, was what Herzl said. But there, agadah, which is the term used for the genre of learning that is not legal, is being translated as a fairy tale. Because for the skeptics, or for oversimplifying, when you had midrashim that were non-literal, or were metaphor, or were homiletics, we're going to talk about this. So people sometimes said, oh, they're like the popular folk tales of other societies. And the truth is, sometimes Midrash does have folk wisdom, does have sometimes using metaphors from the fox fables to illustrate his point. But it's never seen in traditional Judaism as a fable. They're seen as having deep messages, even the ones that are not literal. So in the vernacular then, in the secular usage of the term by Theodore Herzl, it meant fairy tale. But for our purposes, it's a very broad definition. Anything that is not legal, non-halachic, we're calling agadah. Shalom, shalom. We kept your spot here, if you'd like. You're still here. Okay. Make you a little room over here. You are good. So, a few people. Okay. I can move it back. All right. Just a few people who are sick are joining us with Zoom. I'm not going to cater to them. Shalom, whoever you are. I'm not catering to those who come on Zoom, but with God's help, you can see the screen, although you won't be able to read the handouts that I printed, but I can email them. We'll get them next week. Okay, so what we're saying is that the word agadah is translated by some as fairy tale, but in the most broad sense, it means the non-legal parts of rabbinic Judaism, of Mishnah and Talmud, is called agadah, and of Midrash. Okay, so there's a genre. So I could be studying Talmud and studying what's called the Agadah. That's a version of it. Agadah is the stories in the Talmud, and what the non-legal parts of the Talmud and Midrash are: biblical commentary, philosophical ideas, parables, sermons, if you will, talking about motivating people to lead better, holier, deeper lives. So you have different genres in the non-legal part, and stories of the sages to learn from their life. That's another part of Agadah. So when people study the Agadah or the Agadah, it's the non-legal part of rabbinic writing. These are just some terms. We're not gonna test you on them, but they're going to be used again, and feel free to interject. What word sounds like Agadah? Haggadah. It is a very similar term, and many believe it's related. The Torah tells us about the Passover night, V'higadata levincha, and you should tell your child. The question is that word Haggadah that you shall tell, is it related to Agadah? Agadah in Hebrew would mean, this is an Aramaic word. So Agadah in Hebrew can also mean igud. You hear the expression igud harabanim, the association of rabbis. Igud. Igud means to pull a bunch of things together, a group, agudah, agudas Yisrael. That's another term for organization. So agudah means to pull it together. So some understand that the word agadah comes from the word attraction, pulling together. How do you move the hearts of people? Agadah. Halacha doesn't always pull the hearts. It may pull the mind, tell you how to behave, but the hearts, if you want hearts and minds, you need both. In general, in Judaism, we always have the letter and the spirit. So, for example, in the written Torah that we discussed last week, the written Torah, the Tanakh, so the 5 books of Moses, the Chumash would be more primarily law, not Genesis, but half of Exodus, all of Leviticus, half of Numbers, and most of Deuteronomy are going to be laws. But the prophets will be more stories or inspiration. So you have the body and the soul. You have the law and the spirit. And when it comes to the Talmudic rabbinic writing, you also have similar things. You have Agadah, which pull the heart, and then you have the law. So here's a story told of an Agadah type of story about Agadah. A rabbi was a teacher, was being harassed by his 2 students. One said, Rebbe, teach us law. And the other one said, teach us Agadah. And they're busy arguing, and they're not getting anywhere. So the rabbi says, it reminds me of a man who had a young wife and an old wife. The young wife plucked out, every time a white hair showed up on his head, she plucked out the white hair. She didn't want to be married to an old guy. And the old wife plucked out the black hair. Every time she saw one, she didn't want to be married to some youngin'. The guy ended up bald. You're pulling me from both sides is what his, we're going to end up with nothing here. So that would be a version of where he's giving, it's about Agadah, but telling you something that you'll remember the story. Trust me, you'll remember the story of the bald rabbi with 2 wives long after anything else I'll say in this class. That's guaranteed. Because it's good, it's useful. It's like, hey, you can't make everybody happy. We're both going to end up bald here. It works on so many levels. So Agadah has that attraction. So some say the Haggadah means in the Torah, draw your son near, draw your child near by telling the stories of Passover, by elaborating on the story. So again, there are different opinions about what the word Haggadah, how it's related to Agadah. But again, Haggadah is spelled with a hey. Okay, we don't have to get into that now, but Agadah is with an aleph. It's the Aramaic word, and that's the Hebrew word, but it may be related from the idea of drawing close or binding. Okay, so there are genres. One is legal and one is non-legal. So if I say Talmudic medicine, that's Agadah. It's non-legal. But if it's a legal thing, that'll be halacha. So it's a genre. The problem is that in Genesis, for example, you have very little halacha, but you will have what we would call Agadah, stories. Again, this is not the proper language to use for the Chumash, because the Chumash it has stories and it has law, but Agadah and halacha is used more in Talmudic and rabbinic writing from the year 200 BC till about 500, 600, 700, and the editing process takes another couple hundred years as well, until that period called 600, 550, 600, the Amoraic period. So the point, though, is that there are works that have a mix of both of these. In other words, the genres are not in silos. They're not. There are books that are predominantly of one type. So the Talmud has both in it, but predominantly legal. So what people did at a certain period, they made a book called the Ein Yaakov. They cut out all the stories of the Talmud and all the homiletics and all the biblical interpretation, all the non-legal stuff, and made a book out of it. And they would study Jews who were less sophisticated or late at night after a long day work. They would study Ein Yaakov. That's the name of the book. So it's excerpts of the Talmud, the non-legal part of the Talmud. So it has the same commentaries as the Talmud, but just an excerpted version. It's all dessert first, in other words. It's all the good stuff. It's all the inspiration. It's all the great stories. It's all the shocking ideas. That would be Ein Yaakov, and that would be, you're a long day at work and you're falling asleep. Ein Yaakov class in between Mincha and Ma'ariv, between the afternoon and evening prayers. Until today, many synagogues will have an Ein Yaakov class. So, so that would be taking from the Talmud, taking out the non-legal and making a separate work. Okay. When we talk about it, sometimes we'll talk about what period is it from. Is it from the sages of the Mishnah, from 200 BC to 200 of the Common Era, or the sages of the Talmud from 200 to 500? The reason why I keep saying 500, 600 is that the Talmud has a whole period of when it's being edited and put together, at least another 100 years. So be that what it may, so there's a period. Now they're looking at the works. So if we have to talk about the works, there's Midrash works, which the word Midrash, we spoke about last week, means to seek out. So to seek out, primarily it can be based on biblical verses being expanded, biblical verses being compared, biblical verses being extrapolated upon, using it as a springboard. That is what Midrash is. It means to search out, and we're going to have in our readings where it's originally used in the Torah as well in a few places. We'll pick one. So Midrash is based on verses. There are other types of learning. The Mishnah is without biblical verses in general, just telling you the law and telling you the debate about the law. And it's of the same time period, but it's a different type of writing. The Mishnah begins. What time in the morning do we say Shema? We say it from the time you could tell between this color and that color, or when the Kohanim begin to do their service in the temple. It is not telling you, a Midrash would start like this. How do we know we should say Shema in the morning? Because it says when you wake up and when you go to sleep, at the time when you go to wake up and go to sleep. But Shammai says like this. In other words, it's a different genre. Is it based on the Torah? That's Midrash. Or is it an oral tradition where sometimes later on, the Talmud would ask a question. Menahani Mili, where do we know this from? If it's something that's like not a known fact, they'll ask that question, and then they'll quote biblical verses. But the structure is not built on the biblical verse, it's built on the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is this oral tradition and oral debate, possibly based on sometimes things they derive from the text. You just don't know how until the Talmud comes along. We're going to have a timeline to help you see that. But basically, it's not until the year 200 and on where they start asking the question in the Talmud, where do we know this from? But the same rabbis who wrote the Mishnah also wrote Tanaic Midrash, where they do speak about where we know the laws of Paschal Lamb from in the Torah. So these all make up rabbinic literature. They're different types of works. So period, Tanaic, Amoraic. Tanaic is from 200 BC till 200 of the Common Era, when the Mishnah is written by Rabbi Yehuda or composed by Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. And then 200 to 500, Amoraic period in Babylon. Mishnah is primarily in Israel. Amoraim are primarily, not all. There's a Babylon, just to mix things up. In the Talmud is a Babylonian Talmud, which is finished in about the year 500. But about the year 350, there were sages in Israel, but under Christian persecution and other things happening, the Jewish community in Israel itself shrank, and the sages moved primarily to Babylon. So they closed their work called the Jerusalem Talmud, Talmud Yerushalmi, commonly known as the Palestinian Talmud, because Palestine was not the name for Arabs. It was a name that the Romans gave for that piece of land, and anyone who was there. So if you look up the Palestinian Talmud, no, this is not about, how you blow up things. It is the Jerusalem Talmud in Hebrew, Talmud Yerushalmi, and it finishes about the year 350. And many of those sages end up in the Babylonian Talmud. So you have the Talmudic stuff happen in Israel, but the Mishnah is primarily composed in Israel. Again, there's a lot of cross-pollination in Babylon and Israel. The two main centers of Jewish life, I'll give them three, but two main centers of Jewish life until the year 800 are going to be Israel and Babylon. Also, Egypt, in the time of the Second Temple, you have a very strong Hellenistic Jewish community, but is more acculturated and ultimately assimilated, and ultimately they don't continue in the same way because of different historical reasons. But the two centers of leadership, for sure, for the Jewish world, pre-Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jewry, are Babylon and Israel. Yes?
Was that Cairo or Alexandria?
It was Alexandria at that point. That was the center. And you know, some of our oldest documents that we have extant are from the First Temple period in Elephantine, which is an island off of Egypt, where you have Jewish soldiers. This is First Temple period. Jewish soldiers. I believe it's First Temple. It's First Temple because it's under the Persian rule. I'm sorry. It is. Okay. After this, maybe the beginning of Second Temple. I don't want to mess this up. Maybe the beginning of Second Temple, but I believe it's from even before. I think it's even from before. You have the Jewish soldiers who are in Egypt, and they're asking for matzah or whatever it is, you know. And again, how assimilated were they? How rabbinic were they? How traditional were they? But they're Jewish, and they keep the Jewish traditions. And we have this, we have copies of it. It's in the Brooklyn Museum. I think they have copies of it. But I think the original somewhere else. I think in England, I believe. But either way, point being, the two centers of what we call rabbinic Judaism is Israel and Babylon. Cairo, Egypt, Alexandria, is there at the same time, but they're not part of the intellectual, non-Hellenistic rabbinic Judaism. They're part of the Hellenistic Judaism, and it develops in its own way, which we're going to get to when we talk about the translations of the Torah. And one of the famous ones is the Greek translation, which was made for those Jews, or in that place, or for the king of the time, Talmud, which will be the next series. Okay, feel free to interject, because I want to get first the language, and then we'll jump in. This time we'll do text. Okay, so other types of work, you have Mishnah and Talmud, and they both include halacha and agadah. You have Midrash. There are halachic and agadic Midrash. In other words, Midrash is based on the biblical verses, extrapolation. It doesn't have to just be stories. In other words, a lot of times, and I know I'm confusing everyone, but a lot of times people will use the term Agadah and Midrash interchangeably. But there are things called halachic Midrash. How do you know you should put on your tefillin? What do you do on Pesach with the Paschal lamb? How do you eat your Seder? And we have much of it, you guys know, from your Haggadah. As we're going to encounter, pieces in the Haggadah are clearly halachic Midrash. Other parts of a Haggadah are more narrative, more stories, more homiletics, if you will. We're going to come back to that. So in Midrash works, there are some that are more exegesis, which means interpreting the biblical verses. Homiletical will be giving more like sermons, whole pieces about ideas, or narrative, telling stories. So again, all the Midrashim are pieces of this. They're just certain works that are more of one versus the other. These last three terms are more modern terms, because when they're analyzing the different forms of work that we have today, they'll say, oh, this one is more based verse by verse by verse, like we're going to see in a second in our text. Some are based on verses, some are based on concepts, some are based on holidays. Some are based, in other words, you could have these sermons about the themes of the holidays. So it's based on verses, but it doesn't follow a linear fashion of the biblical text in the same way. Okay? So these are the forms, but we are going to focus on Midrash, and we're going to try to go down the path of the Midrash as it relates to, not halachic. We're going to try to move away from that, although we're going to have to touch on it. So to know what something is, you have to know what it's not. So we're going to need a little bit of that. So when we're speaking of masters of the word is the Tanakh. We're interpreting, for our intents and purposes, the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, through the lens of the prophets, but we're also interpreting the prophets as well through the lens of the Chumash. We will hyperlink everything. And now sometimes things may be taken out of context for midrashic readings, and then we have to understand how that works exactly. But we'll give some examples today. All right, so let's open our textbook for a minute. I made these copies. So the first page just has major halachic works. This is just to take a bird's eye view. I may have for the people on the screen. Yes, I have it there. You could probably, look in as well. I'll highlight. I can magnify the slide. So I'll go like that. So if you take a look, those who are online, you have these Tanaim writing midrashic work. Most of them are halachic. They have stories in them, but they're mostly based on law. So they start from Exodus, the laws of the Paschal Lamb, and then they go further. Sifra, so the Mechilta, we're not sure exactly why these things are called what they're called. The Sifra is on Leviticus, okay? And then you have the Sifri on Numbers and Deuteronomy. You have nothing on Genesis, because Genesis has no laws. I'm moving further. Then you have the Talmud. The Talmud really is the greatest source of Midrash because it has so much. And from a point of view of traditional Judaism, it has the most authority. Why? Because the Talmud has been studied as a book of law, and it has been consistently looked at through a microscope by the sages. So therefore, if there were variant readings, don't forget these things all started as manuscripts. So if there were variant readings, they were solidified, they were agreed upon, they were debated, they were discussed. Midrash, some have more manuscripts. We call them, in academic language, they call them witnesses. Before the printing press, you could compare different documents. There are whole midrashim that have been lost to us. Because if it says in the Talmud, everything depends on mazel. What's mazel? Luck. Literally, it means your lucky stars, the constellations. Everything depends on mazel, even the Torah in the temple. That's an expression. But one of the readings of that is there's so many great works that were lost. Because if it wasn't copied, because there was somebody better, people just didn't copy your work. It seems like Maimonides, who wrote tremendous amounts of amazing works, also wrote a commentary on the Talmud. We only have slivers of it, pages. Because Rashi's was so much better, you're not going to bother for the sake of having a complete library copy, 10,000 pages. It doesn't work that way. That's a luxury. If you're not going to use it or lose it. So what happens is certain works just didn't make it. Or many works, we're talking about the Hellenist Jews of Alexandria. Once Jews stopped speaking Greek, because they were all killed there and wiped out and oppressed and expelled, and it was horrific there. There was a gap. No more Greek Jews there, or very few. So we lost all their works. Arabic writing, if it wasn't translated immediately, like Rambam was translated in his lifetime, or right after his lifetime, many of his works, it had a better luck than other works that were not translated right away, because as there's a shift from Arabic-speaking countries to the Christian-speaking, to the Western countries, whatever it is, things can get lost. So there are midrashim today rebuilt from quotes in many other medieval works, and then they find in the Bodleian Library, whatever you pronounce it in England, or they find in the Beinecke, they find manuscripts. There are manuscripts here in the Vatican of midrashim that have never seen the light of day. Now, I would just say, from a traditional rabbinic point of view, even though it's non-halachic, so it doesn't matter as much, you could have a multiplicity of opinions. We're not looking for only one opinion. We're comfortable. But if something goes against what we would consider Orthodox Jewish theology, traditional Jewish theology, things that seem strange, we'll say, okay, it's a strange midrash. No one died from a question. We're not as attached to answering every problem. And it doesn't mean, if it's not one of the accepted midrashim, people could find strange midrashim. And I'm going off base here. Imagine somebody 100 years ago, literally collecting from the Cairo Geniza, from works. How about from Muslim and Christian works that were quoting Jewish sources? People pulled them back in and said, these are midrash. How accurate are they? We don't know. There's some great stories that have made it into the bloodstream of the Jewish people today that their sources is an Islamic quote of a Jewish story that they had heard. How accurate was it? How much did it change? We don't know. So my point is, there are works that are seen as more authoritative. The sages being quoted are seen as having legitimacy. But again, their province, like with artwork, where did it come from? Their pedigree is not always clear. So a Midrash, you could say, my kids have a joke whenever you don't know a source or something. Oh, it's a Midrash. Oh, it's the Jerusalem Talmud. No one's gonna look. No one's gonna know. Oh yeah, it must be the Jerusalem Talmud. Oh, it's a Midrash. Who's gonna prove me wrong? So, which is why Herzl uses the language, Im tirtu ze lo agada. If you wish, it's no fantasy. It's no fairy tale. So what happened? Midrash, which we're going to discover from a traditional point of view, is the repository of all the great ideas of Judaism, all the theology, all the mystical secrets. Everything is alluded to a Midrash. The philosophers, the mystics, everyone goes back to the Agadah because it is so rich. Okay, I'm going back just for those who are on screen, who are there. So you have Aggadic Midrash, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, Seder Olam is more like genealogy, and you have this in your book as well. Midrash Rabbah, this is a great one. Midrash Rabbah means the great Midrash, and it has one name, but really it's a bunch of different works. There are a bunch of different works written by different people with slightly different approaches, quoting the same rabbis. The same pool of rabbis are being quoted, but how it's being arranged and how it's being structured and when is it put together over a period of 500, 600, 700 years, but it ends up with one name, Midrash Rabbah. But really, if you look, and we're going to discover today, the difference between Leviticus Rabbah, Shemos Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, Esther Rabbah, they really had, Rabbah just means big, and because they were stuck together early on, so they got that name. So this is the Midrash Rabbah. If you take a look, the Rabbahs, it's the bottom right on the page. You have Bereshis Rabbah, and then you have Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, Ruth, Shir Hashirim, Koheles, Esther, and Eicha. So on the Megillus, and then you have other ones. Here's an interesting one. I know a little bit off topic, but right above, you see in the 1300 Midrash Haggadah, there you have a Midrash in Yemen that's composed with many, many Midrashim that we no longer have. This guy put together a huge repository of Midrash, but from things that are no longer extant. And there were rabbis and rabbi academics, historians, who dug through these other works and found quotes and came up with a theory that these were all from an older work. They recognized a certain type that we had little pages from. And then we discovered whole manuscripts that literally matched what these theories had been based on language. So imagine, 5,000 pages and someone's plucking out a quote here, a quote here, a quote here, and say, no, this is from an earlier work. And then the hypothesis turns out to be true. And we have actually a manuscripts that were discovered. Nowadays, everything now is hyperlinked in the sense of online, everything is scanned, and you're putting together all these old manuscripts, and people are finding things over the last 100 years that no one had ever seen, and people hadn't seen in hundreds of years before. All right, getting off topic, but this is the lay of the land. Any thoughts before we go further? Okay. So let's turn one more page. This is, again, the lay of the land issue. The lay of the land here is, okay, are those online? I don't think I saved it. No, I don't. Okay, so just in the booklet for a minute. These are the major biblical commentaries, starting at the end of Midrash. Primarily, the Midrash, even if it might have been edited a little bit later, some works were edited a bit later, but all the rabbis are from that period till 600. So then the biblical commentaries that we call are from what we call the medieval period, Rishonim, post-Talmudic, post-Gaonic. I don't have to do, let's go back here. Let me go back. I have a timeline. Oops. Let me share again. Sorry about that. Okay, let's do that again. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so here we go. All right, so if you take a look here, so in the beginning, you have the Tanakh, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets. Then, moving over, we have the Midrashic works, the Talmud's commentaries. So this should be a timeline here. Here we are. So the timeline is Second Temple period for the bottom, right? Redaction of the Mishnah about the year 200. 505 redaction of the Talmud. Then you have what's called the Gaonic period from about 600. They wrote Savaroyak. Those are the editors, the anonymous editors. We don't know much about them from 5 to 600. So from 600 till about 1,000 is the period of the Gaonim. And they live in Babylon. The center of power is still Babylon. As they put it, we sit in the throne of Moses. One of them put it when he was arguing with Maimonides. He says, "You guys can't argue with us in Spain and in Egypt. We are the heirs to the Talmud, who are the heirs to the Mishnah, who are the heirs to the judges, who are the heirs to Moses." Not everyone agreed with that. So, in other words, just from a traditional point of view, there was seen as the close of the Talmud, there was unanimity that was the end of a period. And the question became, what authority, does Judaism become more autonomous, with more autonomy, autonomous not the right word, more autonomy, more localized interpretations within, sharing the same framework, the same structure, the same system of laws. So you end up with Sephardim and Ashkenazim. That's what ends up happening. Some would connect that to Israel and Babylon having some relationship to that later development, but that's for another conversation. So if you look at the bottom, the Rishonim, the early rabbis, that's where we're starting from, major biblical commentators. So about the year 1000. So if you look here inside the pages, so Rashi is one of the big ones. You have Rashi, Radak, Rabbeinu Bachya, that's in this booklet here, okay? Nachman, he's below the line. There's a timeline here as well, all the way to the modern period. These are like the heavy hitters, and they all have slightly different approaches, more than slightly different ways of reading the text, and that's what we're going to unfold. Some will be more philosophical, some will be based on the language more, some will use heavily the Midrashim, others will say, no, we're going to be very picky and only pick the ones that fit with a most basic reading of the text. And then they'll debate what is the most basic reading of a text that's multi-layered. What do you call basic reading? And they'll have their own systems. And that's what develops. And again, traditional Judaism does not see this as a problem. We see this as not a cacophony, but a harmony, that there are all different approaches, although you should know the system that you're reading. The Chumash that you have in front of you, the Art Scroll Chumash, is really a cacophony. What it does is it plucks its commentary from all these different sources and creates a running selection. It is curated, if you will, by the Art Scroll team. And what they choose and what they don't choose is you don't know what their criteria is. You'll have some critics of any Chumash that is made today, as opposed to what we call the rabbinic Bible, which is the classic commentaries on the text. Rashi, Ramban, they are there, and then you study them, how they fight with each other, how they debate with one another in the text. What is the most basic meaning? What is the meaning of this? We'll get, as we go further, we'll get there. Okay, I just wanted to give the lay of the land, so to speak, of the big picture. I know the problem with Judaism is every introduction leads to another introduction. So we go into a gate, and then there's another gate and another gate. We're in that. But okay. So in the Midrashic works, I think I make this bigger, but I don't think it's going to help that much. Here we go. So you have halachic Midrash, which are the above the line, and they're basically telling us laws from verses. And then you have those that are agadic, which are more stories or things like that. We'll call it all Agadah. It's the same rabbis, although it's not edited really in this time period. It's edited later. In other words, you have manuscripts, you have a bunch of manuscripts, you have a bunch of traditions. Someone collects a bunch of them, makes a new one. We don't have always the earlier things that end up on the cutting floor. We just don't. And a lot of times there'll be repetition. People take from one and another, sometimes with their own little twist. With God's help today, we'll get to that. We'll get to some of that today. So, okay, good. So then you can see, so Ein Yaakov, just for example, at the end of the bus, here's Ein Yaakov, 1600. Someone put together the excerpts of the Talmud. But really, it was put together as a work in 1600, but it's of the older stuff. It's from the Talmud. It's from the Talmud. Just happens to be put in a new volume, you know? It's an anthology. So in other words, to know, in other words, who the rabbis are going to be this rabbinic period, which we call Mishnah and Talmud. 200 BC to 500, that's who the rabbis who are quoted by name. Sometimes there are redactors that choose what to put together. They might be a little bit later. And you know what? If you're choosing what gets into a book, you ultimately are the gatekeeper. And ultimately, you know, you have a voice. But since Midrash is not a sole voice, it's not a uni voice, it's rather lots of different voices. So it doesn't really matter in the big picture. But as the books that became, when people quote, oh, it's in Midrash Rabbah, it's in Tanchuma, it's in these different works, so that will give it, that's why they'll say, those who know will say which Midrash it's in. Oh, it's in that Midrash. It's not just some, some later compilation. It's a very popular one. Look on top. It's called Ma'am Loes. It's in the page 1732. Beautiful work written by Yaakov Kuli of Turkey. Nice center of Jewish life for so much post-Ottoman. I mean, not post-Ottoman. Post-expulsion from Spain, it explodes. The Turks let the Jews in and helped the Jews and worked with the Jews. It was a good couple hundred years, and God's help will be good again. So the point, though, is that he makes an anthology, but some of his books he even makes the Midrash into a narrative, where he doesn't go back and forth with all the biblical quotes. He just tells a story, and it's beautiful. Children love it, but he also adds in moral messages, how you should lead your life, things that he sees wrong in his community. So it's a beautiful work, and it's just but it's composed of strands from other earlier works. But if someone quotes the Ma'am Loes, like, okay, 1732. I mean, for Jewishness, that's a Johnny come lately. All right. That's like, Hasidism. Again, I'm not saying they're not taking from earlier sources. I'm just bringing home this idea that you're going to find this, that not all midrashim are created equal because of that. Okay, not to be a dead horse. So we have here, I'm just moving this a little bit so we can see better. We have two categories of midrash. I said this already, but I'm just going to do it. Halachic midrashim, they document the process of deriving mitzvot from the Torah. Agadic midrashim, moral, philosophical, mystical teachings, as well as stories, parables, and narratives. And other types of midrashim, I know we did this last week, but I just want to bring it back. You have legal exposition, historical narratives, moral, ethical, philosophical, parables, and Torah commentary, and also lives of the sages. Okay. So the term midrash is applied to teachings quoted by the sages of the Mishnaic and Talmudic periods, anywhere from 100, 200 BC to 500 C. The reason why, again, the numbers have to do, if you look at people we know by name that are quoted, we have from about 200 BC in Ethics of Our Fathers, we start quoting these people by names, but they have relatively few teachings in their names. It's the later students that have it in their names. Okay. So now, this is, let's see, we'll spend a little time on this for a moment, although it's going to come up later when we get to the more exotic midrashim. One of the big issues is some midrashim seem fanciful. I'll just give you one from last week. Last week, there's a midrash that says, and Basia, daughter of Pharaoh, in the biblical text doesn't say her name, just says daughter of Pharaoh. But in the book of Chronicles, it says her name, Bitya. So, and we say the word Batya means daughter of God. That's what Batya means. And God says, you took care of my son as your own. I'm going to consider you my daughter. Every convert is seen as a daughter and child of God. And Batya, adopted mother of Moses, goes out with them, leaves Egypt. Now that must be a tragedy too. You just think of it. She leaves behind her family and destroyed Egypt, and she joins the Jewish people, her adopted people. According to the Midrash, and this goes, again, they are looking back and forth in the Book of Chronicles and other places, traditions, but according to tradition, she was going down to the Nile to, one of the Midrashim say, to immerse herself, to convert to Judaism. Whatever conversion was at the time, she was rejecting idol worship. And the Nile was worshipped by the Egyptians, as we're going to discover today as well, which is why it was smitten first. And she's going to immerse herself in this mikvah, in this thing, to reject it as idol worship and to become part of to adopt the Jewish religion. It's not in the biblical text. Whether that's, if someone asks, is that historically true? It doesn't matter. It's true. The Midrash is true because it has a true message. The true message is that, again, it might be true as far as it may be a narrative that was transmitted orally, because there are many such narratives. But there's a message here. What is the message we're saying here about how God treats a convert? You know, here you have the daughter of Pharaoh. It doesn't matter. What do you mean? She's the firstborn of Pharaoh. She should have died in a place. No, she joined. She left that behind, for example. Or God says, you took care of Moshe. That's it. You're the equivalent of the leader of the Jews to me. So there are many messages. But one of the lines there, it says, she stretched out her hand, it says. The Hebrew word used there is she either sent, I probably shouldn't get off the topic like this, but it says there, she's surrounded by her young maidens. And then it says she sent her maidservant, used a different word, Amma. Amma either it's another term for maidservant, or it means her hand. So and for different grammatical reasons as well, it doesn't fit that well to say it's a maidservant. It changed mid-sentence from young girls to maidservant. In other words, there were different words used for the maidservant. All of a sudden, you use a different Hebrew word. So one Midrash says she stretched out her hand to reach the child, and God made the word Amma there. God made her hand stretch to get it. So a miracle. Her hand extended, her arm extended. She didn't send a maidservant. Her arm extended. What's the message there? There's going to be many messages, but one of them is you don't always have to do your best to save the child, and God will help you. In other words, you may think, how am I going to reach the child? The child's in the Nile. There are crocodiles. How am I going to get that child? You do your best, and God will do the rest. There are many such other stories that you would say, oh, that's the message. It's a true message. Whether that's what happened or not doesn't matter as much. In other words, the Midrash, and because it doesn't matter as much, you don't always know, wait, are they trying to tell me a homiletical truth? Or are they telling me what actually happened and what the basic meaning of the text is? You don't always know from Midrash. The later commentators, like Rashi and these other people, will cherry pick based on what they feel is meant to be literal or the most basic meaning of the text. We're going to come back to that. I know I keep saying it. Once I say there's a multiplicity of meaning, why do I keep saying going back to the most basic meaning of the text? So that's not really a question for the Midrashic rabbis. It's really the question for the other rabbis that come later. One thing's clear. The rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud do differentiate between law and agadah. So in other words, when they're going to analyze a biblical verse, let's say the verse says you should bind it as a sign upon your arm and place it upon your heart, they understand it to mean tefillin on your arm facing your heart, even though they know you could read it as meaning you should think about it all the time. It should be on your heart. That's not the legal meaning of it. The legal is that tefillin should be both on your heart and on your arm and next to your heart. So there are ways of legal reading and non-legal reading of the same text. But everything else is really in play because the Midrash they're not arguing that much about what actually happened. Like, for example, the beginning of this week's Torah portion, if you look at the Midrash, and God says to Moses, I appeared to Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, without the name. I did not reveal to the name Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. What is God trying to say? So in the Midrash, there's 20 different interpretations of what God is trying to say to Moses. Is he rebuking Moses? Or is he saying good things about our forefathers? Or is he saying good things about the future? There are all these different interpretations, all based, and nobody says, you're right, you're wrong. They just quote, this rabbi says this rabbi says this, rabbi says this. It's okay, they can coexist. Which one was the one meaning? Well, there, he could have meant a multiplicity of things, but sometimes they're mutually contradictory. They couldn't have both happened at times, but the message can be true, even if they didn't both happen. Now, this is what we get to now. When you have Midrashim that are wild, let's say the arm stretching, okay? The arm stretching. It's a bit wild. So here's the Maimonides. Maimonides says there are three groups of people who read the sages. The first group is the largest one. I've watched them. I'm an observer, Maimonides says. I read their books and hear about them. They accept everything literally. Any wild Midrash, he says they don't understand science. They're far from knowledge. They're simple people. They read a rabbinic writing and they take it. They don't understand that there's metaphor, a message behind it. I'm putting the words in because he says it in a moment. He says they possess no perfection, which will give them their own insights. In other words, not like they develop these ideas and they can compare and contrast and build on it, because the Midrash, according to Maimonides, is building blocks for deep philosophical and mystical, I don't know if they're mystical, but deep philosophical and spiritual ideas. So they believe that everything is surface. They read everything just surface. And they base on their own inadequate knowledge because they have faith, but they read it simply. They're not thinking about what that means and how it fits into other things. They're doing piece by piece, and they're not seeing big pictures, and they're not seeing structures. That's what about it. Then he says they understand it only in a literal sense, even though some of them, you take them literally. I'm not saying this one that I just mentioned now. Make even the uneducated, let alone sophisticated scholars, ask how any in the world believes such things are true, let alone edifying. So there's a whole series in the Talmud of Agadata called the Rabba Bar Bar Chana stories, fanciful stories. Here's one of them. We're traveling on a boat, and we stopped on an island, and we lit a fire, the rabbi is describing. And all of a sudden, we realized the island was moving. It wasn't an earthquake. We had made a fire and settled on the back of a huge sea creature. And we escaped just barely with our lives to get back to our boat. I don't know if that's Robinson Crusoe. I don't know if it's Gulliver Travels. I don't know, right? What is Gulliver Travels? What is this? What is this? Some sort of Greek myths? What is this? Nonsense. The commentator, no, slow down, buddy. Not nonsense. It's telling you sometimes you may come to a place and you think that there's nothing living here. There's no civilization here. There's no people. It's just a bunch of barbarians. They'll be so happy that we came here. This can be said about coming to America with Native Americans or landing in Israel with the Arab population. And all of a sudden, things start moving underneath your feet. All of a sudden, there's a living creature there that you didn't know was there. So again, these are like these stories that can, and this is just one layer of meaning. There are other layers of meaning, but they can be very, very, very powerful. But Maimonides is saying some of those stories just seem fairy tales. And if someone accepts them just literally, he wants to say they're ignorant and completely regret their own folly. He says the effort to honor and exalt the sages by accepting everything literally really humiliates them. Because if you take it literally, you're like, what kind of nonsense is this? So that's one of the Rambam is saying that you can have people take things literally and they think they're being religious and they think and they are, but they're not sophisticated. And Midrash, although it was said, this is always the big issue. Midrash was told to the general population, but we don't know if it was told originally with what the message is at times, right? If you just tell the story without the message, some people just see it as a fairy tale, right? Okay. Then he says the second people is also large. They also understand everything literally, but they just throw the baby out with the bathwater. They say, "Oh, those stupid primitive rabbis. Oh, how foolish were they? We're so much more sophisticated now. We have cars." No, I'm saying, in other words, they're looking at the back at these people who are, you're making them pygmies in your own image, because you said, "Oh, I take it all literally," and they were just telling fairy tales. So he says, they declare the sage be fools, hold them in contempt, and slander. That was not deserved to be slander. They imagined the more intelligent. The sage was simpletons who suffered from inferior intelligence. They're so pretentious and stupid, Maimonides doesn't hold back, that they can never attain genuine wisdom. There's no humility. They're busy basically saying, "Oh, primitives. Whatever I don't like, primitive. Whatever I don't like, foolish. Oh, whatever I don't like is some folk religion." Buddy, wait a second. Hold back on your judgment for a minute. These people were very wise. They spent a lot of time studying. And so did their grandparents and great-grandparents. They weren't just sitting around gazing at, they're not chelm. They're not studying, gazing at the navel gazing. Most of those who have stumbled are involved with medicine or astrology. How remote are they from true philosophy compared to real philosophers? They're more stupid than the first group. Maybe they're simply fools. In other words, there's nothing like the educated fool, is Maimonides' argument. Said the third group. Maimonides is a bit of an elitist, as you can tell. Maimonides says the numbers are so few in number, you can't even call it a group. It's not even a group. It's a bunch of individuals. But if you want to speak, of a group, like the sun, anyway, which is the only member. This group consists of men whose greatness of the sages is clear. They recognize the points exceeding profound truths. Even though this third group is few and scattered, their books teach the perfection which was achieved by the authors. They understand that the sages knew what is possible and impossible. They knew that the sages did not speak nonsense. The words contain both an obvious and hidden meaning. Whenever a sage spoke of things that seem impossible, this doesn't mean there aren't miracles, though. That always becomes an issue. Well, they were employing the style of riddle and parable, which is a method of truly great thinkers. For example, about Solomon, we say the book of Proverbs is all parables. All students of rhetoric know the real concern of a riddle is with its hidden meaning, and not with its obvious meaning. Like it says with Samson, "Let me now put forth a riddle to you." Since the words of the sages all deal with supernatural matters, which are the ultimate, they must be expressed in riddles and analogies. In other words, we're talking about things, even the biblical text. When you read about the vision of Ezekiel, you're seeing wheels within wheels, angels with eyes around the edge. Someone reads it literally. Oh, there are aliens. Thank God. Now we have aliens in the Bible. They're round and wheels and big eyes. Somehow they always make aliens with big eyes. Children have big eyes, I think. It's something like that. And then others say, what kind? What magic mushrooms were they smoking, eating, ingesting? What nonsense is this? We understand this prophetic vision that we read in the Torah on Shavuot is a metaphor for some spiritual energy that has to be described as having 6 wings and circle and wheel. What that means. And again, the Kabbalists and others, even the philosophers, will talk about how these things are metaphor. The sages are following in the same footsteps as the Torah. And they're also using parables and stories. So this is the Maimonides about things that seem, okay, let me go back for a second. Because that is the issue of, and this is what, I'm giving the ends of the spectrum here. The end of the spectrum is sometimes we'll find midrashim that seem fanciful. Don't worry, don't lose sleep over it. You don't have to stretch your faith, so to speak, to find meaning in it. Now, the challenge of Maimonides is, people, whoever's interpreting, people may end up giving within many people, when they read a new text, they have their preconceived notion and they force it into it. They have a few big ideas. And then they force it in. I remember a person that used to come here to learn. Alav Shalom passed away. There were certain things, the bent timber of human experience, the idea of the molding of people, the idea of the binding of Isaac. There were different stories that he interpreted everything through. We do that. It's natural. So the challenge always is, to be wise, it has to be a broad a broad take and a willingness to hear new approaches to it. Otherwise, you force everything into a very small shoebox. All right. Again, this is just to show the outer reaches of Midrash, the challenges of its limitation. Okay. Let us go into, this is relevant for, I'm going to come back to this. I want to jump in. I want to jump in here to what I have here. The original readings are about the oral tradition and the Midrash, but earlier on, I want to go to the Haggadah of Passover, number 13. And in our, okay, you're not going to have everything here, those who are online yet. But the first one, reading 13. Reading 13. Pinchas, will you begin?
It happened to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Azariah, Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Tarfa were reclining at a seder in Bnei Brak. They were discussing the exodus from Egypt all that night until their students came and told them, "Our masters, the time has come for reciting the morning Shema."
How many people are familiar with this? Familiar with this? This is the Haggadah, in the Passover Haggadah. It's a narrative. It's no legal thing being taught in this paragraph. This paragraph is proving the point of what we said before. We said right before, even if you're all wise, even if you're all learned, or if you know the whole Torah, you still have to tell the story of Passover to the best of your ability. And then we prove it. Ma said it was a story, or Elazar, Rabbi Tarfon, so Mesubim Bnei Brak, they were sitting and leaning, reclining in Bnei Brak, right? So we're bringing a proof text from a story. It's a narrative. All right, take the next one. Eric, Dr. Watsky, will you read what Elazar ben Azariah said? Just by the way, Elazar ben Azariah is not saying this at this event. It's taken from a different rabbinic source. In other words, some of this, the Haggadah, this story of Elazar ben Yeshua, does not exist in any other Midrash except the Haggadah. Its original source is the Haggadah. But other parts of the Haggadah are plucked from other parts of the Talmud or other Mishnah or other places. Okay, so the second one is plucked. First paragraph is its natural place. This doesn't really matter as far as the content, but just to show you the different forms of Midrash that you're all familiar with because you read the Haggadah. You're not even aware of how many forms you're familiar with. All right, look at it further. All right, let's slow down for a second. What do you mean like a man of 70? Oh, I feel like 70. What does this mean? So we have a Talmudic story that explains it. You need a backstory. He was 18 years old when he became the head of the Sanhedrin. They pushed out Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel, the tough guy. Rabbi Gamliel humiliated Rabbi Yeshua. And they were upset with Rabbi Gamliel for overstepping his bounds. And they removed him. But they didn't want to put the next greatest guy, Rabbi Yeshua, in. That would be double humiliation. So they picked Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who came from a good family, but he was young. And the Talmud tells us, he said to his wife, "Who's going to respect me?" The next morning, he woke up and he had 18 strands of white hair. The job, distressed. The mystics would explain, no. His inner life came to the fore. In other words, he was truly a sage. He happened to be 18, but he was already a sage. Just the physical ended up reflecting the spiritual. Later mystics would say, and this is totally off topic, but it's related to Passover, that he's a reincarnation of Samuel the prophet who died at 52. 52 and 18 makes 70. And they connect him. There's other reasons why they're connected. But we can leave that aside. That's not relevant for our analysis here. My point is, there are layers of richness that get hyperlinked and hyperlinked and hyperlinked. What the rabbis do to the biblical text, the later generations do to the rabbinic text. Everything hyperlinked, a ball, each thing being linked to the other, illuminating the other, shedding light on the other. Okay, so what does he say? Now, here's the issue. What is he talking about here that you should say the Exodus in Egypt at night? What are you talking about? You're not talking about Passover night. That we know. It said we had other quotes and we'll have other. It says you should tell the story of Passover. We're talking about Shema at night. During the daytime, we say 3 paragraphs of the Shema. We say, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul. Then we say the second paragraph, if you will be good, and if you will listen, it will be good, if not. Then we say the paragraph called tzitzit, which mentions leaving Egypt. Now, people don't wear tzitzit at night the fringes, because the Torah says about the fringes, the talit, you don't wear talit at night unless it's Yom Kippur, and that's for another reason. But the mitzvah in the Torah says you should see them, and it was understood from our sages that it's only in daylight that you're supposed to wear the fringes. At night, you don't have to wear the fringes. That's why talit is not worn at night. The only time it's worn at night is Yom Kippur, and then we put it on while it's still daylight so we can make a blessing. You cannot make a blessing when you put a talit on at night, okay? Because it's not obligatory, no blessing. Technical, but here's what he's saying. He's saying the general way of understanding what he's saying here, I did not have a proof text to this. Look what he said, until Ben Zoma came along. What did Ben Zoma say? Is a biblical text, and don't forget the principle of omni-significance. Every word matters. So we say, you may remember that you left Egypt all the days of your life. Okay? So Ben Zoma came along and said, it says in the Torah, you should remember how you left Egypt all the days of your life. The days of your life is daytime. All the days of your life is nighttime. That you should say the Shema, third paragraph. Okay, the Vayomer it's called. Okay, but the sages, you know, Ben Zoma has some people disagree with him. What do they say? All right, the sages say no. The biblical, I'm not sure if they're saying no. Maybe they're saying yes and. We're not sure about that. They could be saying no. Everyone agrees to say Shema at night. That's a given. That's included in remembering leaving Egypt day and night. But the all tells you that even when the Messiah comes, even when there'll be so many miracles, we're going to have so many miracles when the Messiah comes, it will make Egypt look like nature. We're still going to remember leaving Egypt. You know why? It was the seed from which all future redemption grew. Egypt will always be part of our heritage, even when the Messiah comes. We will never forget where we all started from. The bookends of Jewish history is Messiah and Egypt. The bookend of creation is Adam and Eve and Messiah. But the bookend. Now, let's take a look, Yuri. Let's look up this verse in the Torah. Go to Deuteronomy 16:3. We're gonna do some research. Not in our book. We're gonna actually open up another book. We're gonna become a little midrashic. So Deuteronomy is the 5th book here in the blue book, and it's going to be about page 1022. I know where the books are. Okay, and it is, yeah. Take a look. Read from chapter 16, verse 1. Top of 1021.
To observe the month of springtime and perform the Pesach offering for Hashem, your God, for in the month of springtime, Hashem, your God, took you out of Egypt at night.
All right, make sure Passover is over in the springtime. That's why the Jews have a leap year, to make sure Passover is springtime. Because otherwise, since the seasons are based on the solar system and the lunar system, the Jewish calendar, the month is only 29 and 40 days and half days per month. That means only 354 days in a lunar year. The months come from the word moon, right? Months are only 354 days. The solar cycle is 365. So you're losing about 10 days every year. So in order to make sure you don't end up like Ramadan gets moved around the whole calendar, so we make sure Passover is in the springtime because it happened in the springtime. Or what should you do? A little bit further.
You shall slaughter the Pesach offering to Hashem your God from the flock, and also offer cattle in the place where Hashem will choose to rest his name.
We understand that to mean Jerusalem. That's where you bring the Paschal sacrifice. We don't bring the Paschal sacrifice anywhere else. One of the reasons Ashkenazic Jews do not eat sheep, lamb, or even meat on the night of Passover, we don't want to look like we're bringing sacrifices outside the temple. Sephardic Jews say, let's make a commemoration of bringing sacrifices in the temple. Let's have sheep. So you have two different approaches, but these are customs. The law develops. But look at the next verse, Yuri.
You shall not eat leavened bread with it. For 7 days you shall eat matzahs because of it. Bread of affliction. for you departed from the land of Egypt in haste, so that you will remember the day of your departure from the land of Egypt all the days of your life.
This is the quote that the Rabbi Ben Zoma said that he derived all the days of your life. But what's it talking about? Is it talking about Shema? Is it talking about daily life? What's it talking about? It's talking about Passover. In other words, they're saying here in the biblical text, the literal meaning is if you're going to keep Passover, you'll remember all the days of your life that God took you out of Egypt. Ben Zoma is quoting it out of context, that somehow is teaching us a law that you should say the Shema at night, the third paragraph of the Shema, that reminds us that we should every day verbalize how we left Egypt. That's not what the biblical text says. That is a halachic, midrashic reading. Now, one basic way of dealing with it is he's just looking for a biblical hook to hook on what they were already doing. They were all saying Shema in the morning and at night. And they're looking for this extra word that will be like a hook, a source. I'm sure, and there are other takes on it. My point only to bring out here is halachic reading of a text that every Jew reads this in their, almost everyone, in their Haggadah, okay? But if they even, I guarantee you 99% of religious kids do not realize that this Kol Yimei Chayecha in the biblical text is talking about not Shema, but eating the Passover meal. In other words, the halachic meaning, the midrashic halachic meaning, is not the same as the meaning of the text in its most basic form. Okay? Just an interesting, here's the next one. Let's take a look at the next one. Elias, in the text, next part of the Haggadah. No, we're going back into our handout. We're middle of the Haggadah, middle of 13. Right, exactly. In that book, top of the page. Yeah, and those who are online, now this part you can see on the screen. Yes.
One is simple and one does not know how to answer.
This is a rabbinic reading of the biblical text. The biblical text in 4 different places has the term, and you shall tell your child, or your child will ask. So they constructed a concept called 4 children. Does the Torah explicitly talk of 4 children? No. The rabbis are saying because you have different biblical verses, and these different biblical verses each speak about telling the story of Passover, therefore, from here we see that there are 4 different ways that you should be telling the story based on differentiated learning, right? We want to say not all children are created the same. Some are wise, some are rebellious, some are simple, and you don't teach everyone the same. That's the point. But number one is the questions of these 4 sons and the answers are plucked from different parts of the Torah that if you went and looked them up, you would see this is not so simple. This is a reworking of the biblical text. Some of it might be close to the literal meaning of the text, some of them, but some of them are far-fetched. And we're going to go through them right now. Let's start with the first one. Do one more, yes.
What does he say? What are the testimonies, the statutes, and the laws which the Lord our God has commanded you?
All right, that's his question, right? Where is this question? I put in the source because in the many Haggadahs won't tell you where it is. They'll just tell you. They don't want to confuse you with too much information. But let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 20. Elias, now we're back to the blue book. Research. Okay, let's see what we're basing it on.
Okay.
Page 976. 937, correct. Very good. You were ahead of it. He found it right away. 977. Okay, I just want to take for a second. If you look at the verses before, okay, it's the Vahaya. It's about the verses before is Shema. I'm sorry. Look at 973 for a minute. 973. Hear, O Israel, the end of the page. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might. Slightly different translations, but the same words. Okay? And these matters on page 975, command today should be upon your heart. It's all the Shema. That is the Shema. This is the source of the Shema, Deuteronomy. Okay, then it says, we can look at what on the side. It has laws about not succumbing to prosperity. Don't get so satiated that you forget your God. You should trust God. And then, verse 20 of 977, there's a quote. No, what does it say there? Read that, Elias. 977, verse 20.
Excuse me. If your child asks you tomorrow, saying, what are the testimonies and the decrees and the ordinances that Hashem, our God, commanded you?
Okay, he's not asking Passover night. It doesn't say anything about Passover here. It's a general principle that your child will ask you, what's the deal with all the laws? You just told me the Shema. You told me to keep all the laws, and your kid says, what's the reason for it? What should you answer the child? Read 21.
You shall say, child, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Hashem took us out of Egypt with a strong hand. Hashem placed signs and wonders, great and harmful, against Egypt, against Pharaoh, and against his entire household before our eyes. And he took us out of there in order to give us the land that he swore to our forefathers. Hashem commanded us to perform all these decrees.
Which decrees? Now, the whole kit and caboodle. Nothing to do with Passover. It's not about Passover night. There's nowhere Passover night is mentioned here. There's not the context. Context, when it comes to the initial simple reading of a text has to be context. When it comes to halachic reading and homiletics, you can take things out of context. But let's understand the context. Keep on going. Elias, another 2 verses.
He swore to our forefathers, Hashem commanded us to perform all these decrees, to fear Hashem our God for our good all the days to give us life as this very
So the commandments are for who? For us or for God? This reading is for us. God gave us the commandments that we should get the good, whether it's the good in this life, the good in the next life, internal good life, make us better people. We're not dealing with that right now. And one more.
And it would be a merit for us if we are careful to perform this entire commandment before Hashem, our God, as he commanded us.
Is that what we answer the wise son in the Haggadah? Do we quote this? Elias, go back to the Haggadah if you don't mind. You were in the middle of reading. What do we answer him? You in turn. 5th line from the top.
So you in turn shall instruct him in the laws of Pesach. One is not to eat any dessert after the Passover.
Okay, so the rabbis took liberties with the biblical text, and they basically, that's not what it says in the biblical text. I'm gonna do one more because this one is interesting, because this one fits. So first of all, what makes this one wise is that even in the biblical text here, he's wise. He's asking about, he knows to differentiate between different types of laws. He understands there are different categories. He understands that some of them have reasons, some don't have reasons. Aegis, Chukim, Mishpatim are 3 types of laws, the classic understanding of it. One are super rational laws, above logic, above reason, like kosher. Others are what we call testimonials, like Shabbos or Passover, which remind us of things. And then there's moral, ethical laws, which we call natural law, which anyone could have come up with. And the child wants to understand, tell me the difference between these 3, or why we need all 3, or different readings. A little more sophisticated, because he can categorize and he can differentiate, right? That's the wise son, but it wasn't asked on Passover night. Okay, here goes the wicked son. Sorry, you get the wicked son, Mel. No respect. All right.
What is this service to you? He says to you, but not to him. By this excluding himself from the community, he has denied that which is fundamental. You, therefore, blunt his teeth and say to him, it is because of this that the Lord did for me when I left Egypt, for me, but not for him. If he had been there, he would not have been redeemed.
Okay, let's see if this is exactly the Bible says, but I want to go back for a second. The wise son, in other words, the midrashic interpretation of the Haggadah may not be as useful for understanding the basic meaning of the text in its context. Because taken out of context, clearly, the wicked son, part of it you'll see is not taken out of context. Let's take a look at Exodus 12:26. You found it, Yuri? You are ahead of the game. What page is it? 385. Oh, yeah, it is before. It's before. Yeah, it's early. It's 12:26. So it's in both. 357. 357. Okay. So this is next week's Torah portion. And my bar mitzvah portion. And what happens here, God is commanding about taking the Paschal lamb. Okay? And it shall be, would you read, Toby, verse 25? Start with 25.
It shall be that when you come to the land that Hashem will give you, as he has spoken, you shall observe the service.
Okay. He had just spoken about the Paschal service, and it's clearly about the Paschal service. This is clear. You're going to enter the land of Israel, and you're going to observe the service. And what's going to happen next?
And it shall be that when your children say to you, what is this service to you?
Okay. The children will say to you, why do the rabbis consider these kids wicked? What's hinted to in the words here that you think they're wicked? How would it fit in context? Because and the other times the child asks, here they say to you, what's the service to you? So two things. Number one is they're telling you, they're not asking you. The Hebrew word doesn't say don't ask. They'll tell you. When someone doesn't have a real question, it's not rhetorical, it's accusatory. It's not a question. So that's number one, a hint. Now again, it wouldn't have to be the only way of reading the text. The rabbi started with the premise that we have differentiated learning, that we have to be careful how we teach our children. But now when we take that idea from the Haggadah and bring it back here, we could see something very powerful. That if we understand it literally, that these are going to be, God is saying you're going to have children, they're going to be rebellious. Don't think everyone's going to be on the same boat. Don't think it's going to be hunky-dory. They're going to be kids that are going to challenge you. And what does it say, though, here? Here it doesn't say knock his teeth out. It doesn't say set his teeth at edge. No, but in other words, the Haggadah, it says knock him upside the head. That's not what God says in the Torah. What does it say?
You shall say, it is a Pesach feast offering to Hashem. He passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptian. But he saved our household. And the people bowed their heads and prostrated themselves. Okay,
so the people, this is why it's confusing when you're reading it inside the Haggadah at times. Who's bowing? Why are they bowing? Because Moshe told them that they're going to enter the land of Israel and they're going to have children. And these children are going to be rebellious. But they're thanking God, we're going to have kids. They're thanking God, we're going to enter the land. This is great stuff. Oh, they're going to be troublemakers. All right, we'll figure that out when we get to it. But in other words, Rashi, for example, I'm not saying it's the only way to read the text, but you could read this as referring to a wicked son. And then it has a powerful message. The message is we're thankful for those who are rebellious too. Now, the answer in the Torah is not the answer the rabbis give, because the rabbis are using it to create a message about how do you deal with different types of questions and answers. Again, I don't want to give, this is not a Pesach class, so I don't want to give a specific interpretation, but just to feel comfortable with the idea that not every quote that we're even quoting in the sages as biblical commentary, it's not so simple. They're creating a new paradigm using these biblical stories. The Chacham, the wise son, is clearly not taking place on Passover, right? So you could say, well, the rabbis are not talking about Passover either. They're saying all the time, you got to know how to talk to your children. You know what I mean? But the context in the Haggadah seems clearly we're talking about the Passover night We make it about the Passover night. We link it to the Passover night. That's the whole point of it. The whole point of why, I go one tangent. The reason it's in the Haggadah, we started, the first section was, who has to tell the story? And we said everybody, no matter how wise you are. And we proved it from Elazar ben Azariah, right? Then we start talking about, how do you tell it? Well, every child has to be told in their own way. So it's all, the Haggadah is really an introduction to an introduction to an introduction, like Judaism is, to telling the story. It's not really telling the story till halfway through the Haggadah. It's all about, how do you tell it? When do you tell it? Where do you tell it? What has to be in front of you? All those type of things. All right. This was the reason for this, was to bring home that idea that Midrash can be literal, can shed light by close reading, because all the other times it will say either God's name, they'll ask, God commanded you. Here he doesn't, they don't mention God. It's almost like, and not just that, the Hebrew word avoda, right? They're asking, why are you doing all this toil? The Hebrew word service can also be read as toil. That the kids are saying, why are you keeping this Passover nonsense? It's such hard work. You got to clean your houses. You got to do this. So in other words, the Hebrew words of the Midrash reading of the wicked son fits into his language. It's not far-fetched. So a commentator can pluck from the Haggadah and use this Midrash. But the big picture of Midrash are 4 different types of children, each one having to be answered, and what other value system the rabbis are bringing to the table are not always the same thing as what this biblical text is saying on its most basic level. Any thoughts before we go a little bit further? Yes, please. So the idea of creating categories of 4 seems to be the rabbis, one of the methods of the rabbis, and others as well. There are some versions that would have, like, in other words, yes, in other words, there is this idea of creating 4s as a way of laying out ethics of our fathers. We have a lot of that. 4 types of students, 4 types of gifts of charity, whatever it may be. What was the other thought?
Well, so that sounds more plural than singular, right? I mean,
right. So in other words, right. He's talking to all of them. They will say to you, to you guys, all of them. He's telling you Jews sitting here, you're going to have kids that are all going to say this to you. And they thank God for that, which is a powerful message too, in the interpretation. But either way, it's all of them. There's other issues. How do you differentiate the wise son and the wicked son? The wicked son doesn't mention God's name. The wise son does. And there are different, slightly different, interpretations. I'm saying the big picture rabbinic construct of 4 sons that is so familiar to everybody. Everyone knows the 4 sons. It's the most illustrated, illuminated part of Haggadah. But then you look up the sources, you're like, whoa, buddy, where did this come from? They mix and match. They create something new. It's Haggadah. And nobody says anything. What do you mean no one says anything? I mean, it's like let's jump into our Torah portion this week. Close with this here. Look in the, we'll do a little bit of biblical interpretation here. So I have the text here as well. Pinchas, number 15, will you read?
Yet Pharaoh's heart stiffened, and he did not heed them, as God had said. And God said to Moses, Pharaoh is stubborn, he refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is coming out to the water, and station yourself before him at the edge of the Nile, taking with you the rod that turns into a snake.
How many rods did Moshe have? Take the jaguar. Take the rod. Take the staff. What am I, Merlin over here? This is the special, this has the, in Harry Potter, I don't know, they make, in the wands, there are different, what is this? Why are you bringing up the stick with the snake? Why are you going to the water? Can't you go to the king normally? What are you going to the water for? What's that about? All right, read Pinchas Shemos Rabbah.
Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is stubborn.
All right, so the Hebrew word heart, kaved, literally means heavy. Kaved, or it means liver. A kaved is a liver. Okay? So it's a pun in the rabbinic reading. What's the pun, Pinchas?
He's angry, just as liver, kaved, becomes angry, like livid. So too, this one's heart becomes like a liver. He does not understand. He is a fool. His anger rests in the bosom of fools. With what do you chastise the fool? With the staff, as it is stated. A rod to the back of fools.
So according to Ecclesiastes, according to Proverbs, I got to smack him upside the head. This is similar. The wicked son, we say, set his teeth on edge. Hakeyashina, whack his teeth, whatever that means. You know, he's busy saying you guys are working too hard. Make sure he doesn't enjoy the meal. He wants the meal without the work, buddy. Got to pay your dues. All right, different interpretation. But anyway, the point is, we're saying here there's a connection between staff and his foolishness. A little bit further.
Moses too chastised Pharaoh with the staff, as it is stated, and the staff that was transformed into a serpent you shall take in your hand.
Eric, another interpretation. The word kavod also means honor. So heavy means liver. It also means honor, because honor means this gravitas. You have to give somebody honor. It's kavod. All right, would you read that?
Part 7. The Holy One, blessed be he, said to him, wicked one, with the expression with which you honored yourself, the same expression I will be honored at your expense, as it is stated, and I gained honor that he kavedi through Pharaoh.
In other words, Pharaoh's being stubborn and saying, "Who died him? Who are you, God? I don't have to listen to you. I'm king of the world. I don't have to listen to you." And he says that itself, your stubbornness is going to be, chickens will come home to roost. That's your stubbornness is what allow me to be honored. God is saying. All right, Yuri, will you read the next interpretation?
Go to Pharaoh in the morning. Behold, he goes out to the water. He would go out to the water only in the morning, because that wicked one would boast and assert that he was a deity and did not need to relieve himself. Therefore, he would go out in the morning. Catch him in the morning when he needs to relieve himself. And the staff that was transformed into a serpent you shall take in your hand, so that he will be afraid of it.
This idea, catch him with his pants down while he's trying to pull the wool over everybody's eyes. Show he's behind the curtain, that he's just the Wizard of Oz is not so great. What's he trying to show him? The snake that frightened him while he's in the water with his pants down, trying to sneak in his morning constitution. So there's a level of absurdity here, letter of humor. There's a level that could this fit into the literal understanding? Why is he going down to the water in the morning? And what did ancient pharaohs do? There were others that said they were gods. This Pharaoh's not alone. We have quotes in Ezekiel and other places where Pharaoh says, "The river is mine and I created myself." This idea that there is no creator, I created myself. I am part of the Nile, the Ra god that births the children. There's all this, books of the dead and all these theology, if you will, or not theology, be another term for it. The myths of Egypt that would fit with these type of things. The god, they were gods. So what does the god do? He does not defecate. No, I don't have a digestive system like everybody else. So this idea of showing him that he's human. All right, let's do the next one. Do a little more. I'm gonna pick. This is a good one. Let's go to 19. We'll close with that. 19. I'll paraphrase and you'll read 20. Basically, 2 of the plagues. God says, Moses, take your stick and then let Aaron raise the stick and smite the water and turn it into blood. And plague number 2, turn the dirt into lice. Wait, why you give it to Aaron? Till now you had Moses. Elias, read number 20.
Why would the water be thus smitten with the rod by Aaron, as it is written? Say unto Aaron, take thy rod. Rabbi Tanchum.
Now, this is the name Tanchum. This Midrash is called Tanchuma because he quotes Rabbi Tanchum very often. So he's it's one of the reasons, seems to be the reason. We don't know if he composed it or not, if he was the major editor and collector, but his name is mentioned a lot. So Rabbi Tanchum said
To Moses, since the water guarded you when you were placed in the Nile, and the dust protected you when you killed the Egyptian, it would not be proper for your hand to smite them with plague. Therefore, they were inflicted, not by Aaron.
By Aaron, not by you. In other words, we're going to have to smite them. And he explains the reasons for it. There's different reasons why the water has to be smitten. One of the reasons is, it says, they quote right above, if you look at reading 18, Why was the last paragraph? Why was the water afflicted first with blood? Because they worship the Nile. There's a folk parable: smite the gods, and the priests will be afraid. This is like, they're quoting an idolatrous quote that they would say when the gods are smitten, the priests are afraid because if they can't protect themselves, then I better get some new gods. But the idea that the Nile is being smitten, sun is replaced with the moon, the Ra, the sheep, the ram's head. These are all the gods of Egypt, firstborn. These are all the gods of Egypt being smitten, so to speak, that will make them see that there is one God. But going back for a minute, so just the moral message out of this, the moral message. We have a commandment in the Torah: do not oppress an Egyptian. Don't be mean to Egyptians. You know why? Because you were strangers in their land, which means for a while they were hospitable until they enslaved you. But don't say, oh, they did so much bad to me, therefore I don't owe them anything. No, you have to acknowledge the good that people have given. Do not cast a rock in a well from which you have drunk. These are ideas and themes in the Torah itself, but they take it backwards. The value of the Torah, how you treat an Egyptian, we're saying God says even here there's a sensitivity. Moses, not right for you to be the one to do it. The water protected you as a baby. The water has no free choice. How much more so someone who has free choice and did something good for us? How many times in a relationship we get upset, they did something really bad to us? You're like, you're dead to me. I'm done with you. 1 second. God doesn't say that to us, and God doesn't want us to say to others. What happens is there's consequences, the ramifications when I do something wrong, but we can't forget the good. Even the Egyptians enslaved us for 210 years and put us in walls and put us in the water and did terrible things. Don't oppress the Egyptian because you were strangers in Egypt. This is like a radical idea. This doesn't mean you may have to fight the Egyptians. We'll celebrate leaving Egypt. Don't get us wrong. We're not going to not celebrate. But there's an element there, sensitivity. So here you have like a rabbinic reading, which is like a sharp reading, a close reading, because everyone else is, except when it deals with dust and water, it's Moses. Later on, also with the soot, it's also Aaron. It's also taking dust. I'm sorry, not the soot. I think he takes the dust and throws it up and the soot. So there's another one where Aaron as well. But my point is, here you have a rabbinic reading that I'm not sure would necessarily be what you would call a literal reading of the text. Because God tells Moshe in the beginning, go with Aaron. And there's a whole other reason why is Aaron involved here. Some of the rabbis would say, because Moses kept on 3 times, said, I'm not doing it. God said, okay, now I'm sending Aaron with you. Or other interpretations like that. My point is, one doesn't have to read the text this way, but when one does, there's all of a sudden this depth that opens up about relationships, about gratitude, about Jewish history, Poland, I'm going to close with this. The Polish people are very upset that the Jews call it Polish death camps. They're Nazi death camps. Why are you besmirching us? And then the Holocaust survivors who come from Poland say, buddy, everyone and his brother burnt us alive afterwards, gave us over. Of course, there are many righteous Gentiles. That's only because so many Jews were killed in Poland. In other words, there is constantly this question in history about how do we respond to, Poland was called, the Jews called it, they said Poland is a good name. Because what does Po mean? Here, Lin, like Lina, Maza Lina, Lalon, a Milon, Maza Milon. I'm going to the Milon. Check into the Milon hotel, right? So Lin, here we will rest. So that's what they said after they were expelled from Germany, and they ran away after the Black Death, and after parts of the Crusades, but only the Black Death. My point is that to have a sense, these teachings lay the groundwork when you take them later on and put them together in, okay, how do Jews respond to these cultures that have not always treated us well? Look at Turkey. Turkey, was amazing. Right now, not so amazing. When people go and say, oh, those darn Turks, that's not the Jewish way. Ataturk was Ataturk. Erdogan is Erdogan. And the Ottoman Empire is the Ottoman Empire. And, things can change. Doesn't mean we can't have criticism. We can have, but not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, not to spit into the well not to throw stones in the well which we have drank. You know, something these are like the building blocks of Jewish values. So a lot of times it may seem like a midrash. No. It's a it's the basic sensitivity. All right, to be continued. Next week we'll come back. Some of the same reading. I'll print out some more stuff. This way you can take this with you, and you can read chapter 1 and 2 if you haven't yet in that book over there. Yeah.